And to discuss the topic, ECOWAS decision on developments in Niger Republic, let me welcome to our studio here in Abuja, Ambassador Usman Baraya, former Nigerian ambassador to Ethiopia, African Union. It's good to have you join us on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you very much indeed.
Also in the studio is Dr. Sanwo Olatunji David, National Coordinator, West African Civil Society Forum. Thank you so much for coming on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you join us.
Pleasure is mine.
Thank you.
All right, and joining us from our Jos studios is Dr. Abel Ochibo. Abel Ochibo, of course, is a former deputy clerk of the House of Representatives and of the public affairs commentator. Dr. Ochibo, we're glad to have you this morning.
Good morning.
And via Zoom from the United Kingdom, I would like to welcome the ECOWAS Commissioner in charge of Political Affairs, Peace and Security, Ambassador Abdel Fattah Musa. Ambassador Musa, we're glad to have you this morning.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you.
And we really appreciate the fact that you've opted to join us this morning. We understand that you are bereaved, you lost your son, and we deeply sympathize with you and the rest members of your family. So before we kick off, we would like to say that you should please accept our condolences.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the sympathy.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, so gentlemen, you're welcome. We might as well begin the conversation with Ambassador Musa. Ambassador Musa, you are in charge of political affairs, peace and security at the ECOWAS Commission. These are worrying times for ECOWAS, isn't it? And if so, how worrying is it?
Yeah, it's very worrying indeed. And the ECOWAS Authority of Heads of State and Government are very determined to stop the contagion of coup d'etats. If you look at it, the whole of the Central Sahelian belt is today ruled by military juntas. This is not what the West African region was from the early 1990s. We see a very serious reversal, and it is no doubt that this is also coinciding with the multiple threat vectors that we see in the region, whether it is terrorism, and of course, a breakdown in some of these countries between the populations and their government, which also open fissures in the society to allow nefarious forces, including the military. And the issue is very simple. The military's primary responsibility is the defense of the country. So if almost all these coups d'etats, the leaders tell us that they've assumed the reins of power because of insecurity, then they must bear the lion's share of the blame, because they are supposed to stop insecurity, in the region. And I will assure you, that if you look at the track record of His Excellency Bola Tinubu, as a fighter for democracy and others in Nigeria, and the determination that he has demonstrated so far, I think that has, sort of found its way through the entire community, the heads of state and others, within the region, to make sure that we stop this contagion of coup d'etats. It is becoming an epidemic, and the earlier we stop it, the better. So that is exactly where ECOWAS stands, and that is why the authority is demonstrating that level of determination, epitomized by the wide-ranging sanctions and the ultimatum, unprecedented, that has been given to the authorities to hand over within 1 week or, face consequences.
Okay, thank you. We've always thought that coups in Africa is a thing of the past and will not return, but of recent we've seen it rearing its ugly head again. Generations of young Nigerians or young Africans do not even know there was something like that. But one thing I would love to ask you as the Commissioner, Political Affairs, Peace and Security, would love to know the condition of the family of President Bazoum right now.
In fact, the chair of the authority has spoken to President Bazoum. The president of the ECOWAS Commission has spoken to him, and he's in a very hearty mood. He is very defiant. Some people are saying that he has been forced to sign a resignation letter. That is a lie. We've spoken to him, and he's very, very, very determined, that the soldiers will not be allowed to, to succeed. And the authority are not even describing this as a coup d'etat. For us, it is an attempted coup and a hostage situation, and that the president is being held hostage by the authorities. And our attitude to them is how, ECOWAS would deal with any terrorists in the region, in a hostage situation. That is it. But with regard to President Mohamed Bazoum, I think he's very determined. He is holding up, and we believe that sooner or later he will be back, as the president, the legitimate and the legal president of the Republic of Niger.
All right. Thank you very much, Ambassador Musa. We'll come back to you. But just to also acknowledge the terminology chosen by the authority of heads of state and government of ECOWAS, referring to the developments in the Niger Republic as a hostage situation, and of course calling for the restoration of a constitutional order, which would mean that there is no recognition of a coup d'etat. A coup d'etat means an overthrow, which is a complete act itself, and therefore a fait accompli, from which you then begin to pick the pieces. So we of course take note of that one more time to say that the president of Niger Republic, Mohamed Bazoum, is a hostage in the hands of those who are seeking to distort the constitutional order in Niger Republic. We'll come back to you, Ambassador Musa, in the course of the conversation. Now back to the studios here. Ambassador Musa Baraya, Usman Baraya, former Nigerian ambassador to the African Union. Now, it's in some quarters heartwarming that ECOWAS has taken the decisive steps that it has. All of this happening less than a week after the insurrection by the Presidential Guard in Niger Republic. How do you contextualize the ongoing developments?
Well, thank you very much indeed for having me. And true to the my calling as a diplomat, I would like to avail myself of this opportunity to join in sympathizing with Ambassador Musa on the loss of his son. Ambassador Musa has been a very close friend of long standing, and our prayers and thought with him and his family on this loss. Having stated that, asking me to contextualize development, it's extremely worrisome. We are into a very difficult situation now, and like Ambassador Musa tried to highlight, coups are extremely contagious. If they happen here, there is a tendency for them to repeat themselves elsewhere. During what has exactly happened, like you said, this insurrection started, I think, on Wednesday, 26th of May, of July. And by Friday, 2 days later, the African Union Peace and Security Council met and took a decision, and ended up giving a 2-week ultimatum, or to be precise, a 15-day ultimatum. Immediately following that, this was on Friday, and by Sunday yesterday, the authority of heads of state and government of the ECOWAS also took the decision they took. So there was no loss of time. The decisions were extremely timely and in order. My worry is this, I've had stints at the head of Nigerian missions in the United States, in European Union, in Belgium, and of course, lastly, in Addis Ababa. And I know very well indeed the Western partners based, everything they do with us in the developing world is about development cooperation. And the development cooperation normally is based on the things of today: democracy, good governance, rule of law, respect for human rights, and the rest of it. And way back in the year 2013, when the Constitutive Act of the African Union was adopted, there was this decision to adopt or to arrive at Agenda 2063, that is about the Africa we want. In 2013, African Union, Organization of African Union, OAU, was exactly 50 years. So there was a new paradigm shift to change from the old models of doing things to go into new design. And one of the flagship, projects under Agenda 26 was by the year 2020 to ensure that the guns were completely silenced on the continent of Africa. That is silencing of the guns. And by that doing, it was meant that there would be, a conflict-free Africa. But is that where we are now? Far from being there. We see it's unfortunate what is happening, and the way things are, quite honestly, until drastic measures are taken, and of course, measures have been taken by ECOWAS. And to some extent, many political pundits and diplomats are of the opinion that, some are quite extreme, but be it as it may, as far as I'm concerned, the heads of state, of government, they have done the right thing because it is in compliance with everything about the ECOWAS. And if you allow this kind of thing to go, you never can say. My only worry is that Ambassador Musa and the ECOWAS of the general view that it's like a coup attempt. It's not so, as far as I'm personally concerned, and I'm entitled to my opinion.
What's your opinion?
The fact that any coup d'etat that lasts more than 24 hours is a coup. It has succeeded. And that's why the ECOWAS is calling for the reversal to constitutional order. Because what obtains in Niger now is a military, junta that is at helms of affairs. And the way we go about this, we continue with the discussions. I will continue to
Yeah, but how do you link that up, Ambassador, with the doctrine of recognition in international law? State recognition and government recognition. There's no government that has recognized the military chaps in the army.
So, yeah.
So if there's no recognition, how can we say that they're in charge of the government?
No, from their own perspective, definitely they say they are, but there's no international recognition. And of course, I'm of that view. They are not recognized. But the fact of the matter is this: all hands have to be put in deck. And as a diplomat, I believe very strongly in the efficacy of diplomacy. Diplomacy here will be the thread to progress. When you meet, you dialogue, you come up with all sorts of solutions. Solutions can be both kinetic and non-kinetic, and diplomacy comes in as well to try as much as possible to find. But as far as recognition is concerned, nobody is recognizing the government, nobody has recognized it, not only the ECOWAS, not only the African Union, even our international development partners, including the majors, France, United Kingdom, United States of America, nobody has recognized this, and nobody is in support of coup d'etat. Coup is an aberration, and we are generally, not only within the sub-region, we are generally concerned with the general resurgence, of coups all over the continent.
Although, no, I know you want to ask a question. I mean, academics can worry about that perspective.
Yeah.
Because we talked about recognition now. There's also the doctrine of de facto and then de jure. Are they de facto or de jure? Bazoum is de jure. And ECOWAS authority of heads of state and government saying that he's not only de jure, he's also de facto, yes, and that he's just been taken hostage along with members of his family. All right, Juma.
Indeed, let's bring in Dr. Samu Olatuji David, National Coordinator, West Africa Civil Society. West Africa is, facing some trying times of recent times, and a lot of people are asking this question: why now? Why are coups rearing its head again in West Africa? Why?
The first time, let me first start by looking at what the civil society space has been thinking in a bit, to congratulate Mr. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu as the chair of the ECOWAS, because he's getting to that position is introducing a new dynamics to administration in the West African sub-region. We need the bite, we need the force, we need the experience, and that is what our President Bola Tinubu is bringing to the space. His ability to muster 10 heads of state within this period, it's not a mean feat, and we celebrate him for that, and Nigeria is becoming to be the giant or the big brother in the region. And so we think that before now, a lot of things have been happening, and the fiber that holds ECOWAS was gradually losing its relevance. And so that explains why the coups are there. Because when there is no sheriff in town, then everybody does just whatever they like to do.
So we have a new sheriff in town.
So we now have a new sheriff in town. And so that is the signal that ECOWAS is sending now. And that's why, in addition to all the diplomatic consideration, the statement, if we have to use force, that means, look, it's not business as usual. We are brothers, we have ECOWAS Charter to defend, we have several protocols that we have signed that are already gathering dust. We need to dust it up, and we need to enforce whatever it is that we have mutually agreed. ECOWAS itself was 40 last year, so it's 49, approaching 50 this year. And if all the things that we have agreed that we're going to do, way back 76, we are not doing it, we need to begin to ask ourselves what has been happening. And so that there are coups in several West African sub-regions, and like the ambassador had said, it's contagious. If we don't put a forceful stop at one point, it will. There are several things in the social media promoting, let's have it, let it go around. So we need to put a stop to it at a point. And I'm happy that our president, in agreement with his colleagues, the presidents of the 15 West African nations, are determined to put a stop to this aberration. We have all agreed that coup is not the way to go. In the 21st century, democracy is better than military junta.
Democracy is for the people, by the people, and we've seen Nigerians on the streets sort of celebrating the coup, and just yesterday they burnt down the French embassy in Niger. What do you make of that? No,
when we say democracy, you see, the beauty of democracy, or the how do I call it now? The weakness in democracy is that the minority still have their say. It is a weakness in democracy. So those guys that burnt down, that are on the street, they do not represent the majority. They may be in the minority. 100,000 people, even 1 million people burning down street are on the street. But that does not represent the majority view that democracy represents. So at the end of the day, there is no government that has 100% support. And we don't want to have a case of anarchy. Because if those people who voted for the president of Nigeria decide to fight those people who are on the street, then we have anarchy already. So that's why the ECOWAS State of State has to come in and say, no, calm down, we are on top of this. So that you have people on the street does not mean that the government is not popular. It just means that those who were against the government, because the president did not have 100% vote. So there are still some people who did not support him, and they are those ones you see on the street.
Great.
Dr. Sonwo, thank you very much. On December 31st, 1983, there were some Nigerians who trooped out of the street when the Second Republic fell. But years down the road, I'm sure they all shed tears of blood on account of what happened. We're all witnesses.
Yes.
We're all witnesses.
Yes.
Right? I mean, let's know that we might not have been where we are today, but for some of those past events. Let's go over now to our Just Network studios and bring in Ochigbo. We earlier introduced him. Dr. Ochigbo, let's have your pitch on the raft of measures unfolded by the ECOWAS heads of state and government after their meeting in Abuja yesterday, along, of course, with what the AU has also decided. Are these strong signals to the military chaps in Niamey?
Thank you very much. Yes, for sure, the military coup d'etat in Niger Republic is a subject of very serious contemporary concern to everyone in Africa, let me say that. And rightly, the ECOWAS has churned out a number of action steps, which by the assessment I have and we all have, are right on track. My only concern is the fact that these are like short-term measures. And we have to look at it within the whole value chain or the whole hog. Number one, what are the short-term measures in place? What are the long-term measures in place? And if you read the comments and the analysis and much of what people have been saying, I think the concern is about what I'll call the democratic culture. If after, on average, I think most African countries, even in the West African sub-region and so on, we are just within the bracket of about 5 decades of independence. And a number of us, we took on the democratic space. If after close to 50 years, we are still walking around and looking back as if there is jackboot democracy, if you like, lurking in the shadows. Each time we look back, it's like, oh, is there going to be a coup or is there a threat? Then it means something is definitely wrong. So I think the issue of the democratic culture that we must imbibe is something that is of concern. And let me say this. Yes, we have talked so much about the dividends of the, democracy. But then, to what extent have these become mere platitudes, showmanship, rhetorics, theatrics, and so on? So we are getting to a space because we must not give anybody the excuse. When you check, Nigeria that is our own, in 1966 we had the first coup in this country. And if we remember all the cliches of that coup, it's revolving around what many of these coups are still talking about today. We were talking of internal strife, talking of security, talking of terrorism, talking of issues of economics. So the question is that 50 years down the line, that is like cutting a century into two. We are still revolving around the same issue. So the point, therefore, is that, yes, in addition to what ECOWAS is doing, and which is quite commendable, and I think they've risen to action, like previous speakers have talked about, I think we should also make sure that we wind the whole things into one block. That is to say, we are talking of the short-term measures, the immediate measures, and let's also be thinking of the medium-term and the long-term measures. And that is why I say we must be careful to ensure that we instill a democratic culture. Otherwise, we'll just be going round and round. And finally, let me say this. When a government comes and says, oh, we'll make you happy, you are not saying anything. I'm just saying this as part of the long-term measures we show him by. So we must get into a system whereby the dividends of democracy will introduce the parameters of measurability and verifiability. In other words, whatever a government says, let us be able to measure very well, so that we don't give anybody an excuse of non-performance. Because the excuse everywhere is that things are getting bad, economy is getting bad, security is not in place, and all that. So let our governments rise up. In project management, we talk of the acronym SMART. Let us be specific in our objectives. Let us measure them properly. Let them be attainable. Let them be relevant, and let them be time-bound, so that we can see. Before I stop, let me say this. The last speaker talked about, people who, like you asked, perhaps we are celebrating coup. Most times, each time there is a coup d'etat in Africa anywhere, why should we have people who are celebrating it? Yeah, it may not be a big portion of the population, but it tells you that something is wrong. In Nigeria, there's something called stomach infrastructure. I don't want to go into that. But let these dividends of democracy in the long run, in the medium term, in the short term, in the immediate term, let it be along indices that we can very well measure, that we can very well verify. So the heads of government, in addition to the very good measures they've taken, please let them know that this is a challenge, that the dividends of democracy must be visible to all. Otherwise, like I said, they will remain mere issues of cliches, of platitudes, of rhetorics, of showmanship, and just aesthetics. And I believe that that is not what we all bargained for. Thank you.
Dr. Abel Ochubo, thank you so much for your opening statement there. You've raised a lot of pertinent questions. Let's now return to the studio where we have Ambassador Usman Baraya. Ambassador Usman Baraya, ECOWAS has reached out to the military junta in Niger by sending the President Patrice Talon of Benin Republic to negotiate, to talk to them, to dialogue with them, but unfortunately it didn't work out. Why do you think it didn't? And the tough language coming from ECOWAS too, the bite is there, like Mr. Shawolu said.
Yeah, not only, in addition to, don't forget the fact that in addition to that summit of the ECOWAS, there was also a special envoy in the person of David Jr. of Chad Republic. That also has not worked out. It's normal. So all that is to it is that maybe there was lack of adequate preparation, and the junta will feel it's too early in the day to just give it. But the fact of the matter still remains. I want to just, while delving into it, to make a copious reference to what your colleague said about the developments in 1983, for example, in Nigeria, and the general reaction immediately there from leaders. I think way back, some of us are still old enough to remember, where during those celebrations, one of our greatest, icons, political icons, let's say Chief Obafemi Awolowo of blessed memory, he was telling people that were celebrating with him, look, what's your problem? The worst or the best military, the worst political democratic government, the worst is better than the best military regime. So what is there to celebrate about? And let me also go back to developments in Guinea-Bissau, which didn't find expression because of our discussion. President Bola Tinubu, immediately after taking office as chair of the ECOWAS, as if he saw tomorrow, they made a lot of emphasis on zero tolerance.
You know what, Ambassador Baraya, our engineers are telling us that there's some issue with your audio. I'm sure the mic will be sorted out or something cleared up along the line. But we'll come back to you and give you the opportunity of
responding
of speaking further to the issue. That's to say what President Tinubu said at Guinea-Bissau and also repeated at Addis when the AU met. But we'll go over now to Ambassador Musa. Ambassador Musa, who is the ECOWAS Commissioner in charge of political affairs, peace, and security. Ambassador Musa, I would like you to tell our viewers this. Look, if we were to liken what has happened in the Niger Republic, as indeed elsewhere on the African continent, or more specifically West Africa, to a volcanic eruption, we would know that a volcano doesn't just erupt. You have some movements in the tectonic plates, and then before you know it begins to spew lava and all that. So there are usually early warning signs. I mean, scientists talk about animal omens, for instance. What are the early warning signs that ECOWAS tries to apprehend before this thing starts off? Guinea-Conakry, Mali, Burkina Faso, and now Niger. And for those of us who are outsiders, Wednesday would appear to just have happened. Oh, the members of the presidential guard had barricaded the access to the presidential villa in Niamey, and then on and on and on, and what we are now discussing. Did ECOWAS apprehend this? And if it did, what measures were taken to say, look, we have some early warning signs here. How do we abate what is likely to unfold?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. That's a very useful question. It is not the lack of early warning. Seriously, I think what happened in Niger was not 100% unexpected. We should remember, that in March 2021, just before President Bazoum assumed office, there was an attempted coup against him, which was foiled. In March this year, there was another attempted coup against him, which was also foiled. So this is the third time, that Bazoum has been, under that kind of pressure in the country. And it is very obvious all across the region. ECOWAS has a very robust early warning system, which actually talks about, what could happen and all that. And ECOWAS embarks on so many preventive diplomacy interventions in the region. You see, it is at times thankless when you talk about preventing something, because people would ask you, what is the proof that you prevented it? But I can assure you, without the proactive engagement within the region, probably the situation would have been far, far worse in the region. So the early warning signs have always been there. I just want to raise about 2 more points about it. We shouldn't forget that the coups that Ambassador Baraya and others were talking about in the 1960s, in the 1970s, and other things, they occurred within the context of a very uncompromising Cold War between the East and the West. If you look at our terrain today, we are entering another phase of Cold War with the multipolarity that we see today. The bad boys in the region will always have supporters among some of the powers in the world. So there is no unanimity. Multilateralism is dead. This is a major factor in what is happening in much of our region. Against the backdrop of the fact that West Africa is perhaps the fastest growing region in terms of youth bulge in the region, in the whole world, which also adds to the pressure. And of course, the whole asymmetric conflict environment that we see today. So there are so many issues that, have converged. But I must add that West Africa is not an island on the continent. What happens elsewhere also has impact on West Africa. I can tell you, that how the international community, the African Union, and others dealt with the coup d'etat in Chad when General Kaka Debi took over after the assassination of his father. The way it was handled impacted the second coup in Mali, for example. The continent is very united, and we have to be very consistent in terms of following our protocols. The African Union has got the Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Governance. ECOWAS has its supplementary protocol on democracy and good governance. They are all very similar. It is zero tolerance for power obtained or maintained by unconstitutional means. But why the double standards? Our treatment of Chad, knowing very well that Chad has a lot of influence also in West Africa and things like that. So those are some of the things that we have to talk about. ECOWAS is determined not to allow what is happening in other parts of Africa to impact our adherence to the protocol that we have signed up to. Because once you've signed up to the protocols, you cede part of your sovereignty to the collective good in the region. And this is what we are saying when some of these countries which organize coups claim sovereignty. Once you have signed up to these protocols, part of your sovereignty is ceded to the regional authority. And that is what we are leveraging today against a country like Niger. And as we speak, on Wednesday, the Committee of ECOWAS Chiefs of Defense Staff are meeting to work out the practicalities of all the options that are available to the region in order to restore constitutional normalcy in Niger. So this is what I want to add to it. It is not the absence of early warning or early action, but that it is not always that you can prevent many of these things happening in the world. And I think Chad gives us that particular example. We can talk about didn't people know that Senegal was actually teetering towards a possible civil conflagration, and people do not know the effort that went in for President Macky Sall in Senegal, for example, to renege on what many people thought was going to be his attempt at a third term in his country. So those are some of the issues that go beneath, the radar. People do not see them, the effort that go into them. So a lot of crisis situations have been prevented, but it is humanly impossible to prevent all of them. And that is how I categorize what has just happened in Niger now.
Okay, Ambassador Abdel Fattah, yes, Kingsley talked about the early warning signals before the coups happen, and there's conspiracy theories of external influence to these coups. What are your thoughts on that?
Please, can you come again? I couldn't get the last part of your question.
I said Kingsley talked about the warning signals, the early warning signals before the coup. And now I'm going to ask you, some people have talked of external influence in this coup. Let's have your thoughts on that.
Look, if we talk about, Niger in particular, we should remember, that President Bazoum was a very serious trade union activist during all the fight to install democracy in the country against President Tanger's attempt to extend his rule. He was part of President Muhammadu Issoufou's coalition, and we should remember, that President Bazoum comes from a very small minority of the country in of Niger. About 0.8% of the population in Niger are made up of Arabs, we've got the Jerma, we've got the Kanuri, and other, the Hausa, who constitute the vast majority of the country. So there is an elite approach, to power in the country, right? So all these issues were there. And you understand that what happened in Mali, what happened in Burkina Faso, where all our Western partners were forced out of the country, and then they, went and converged in Niger. We got about over 1,000 American forces at the American base over there. The France has got about 1,500. The Germans are there. Almost all the Western, countries are there, and there is a groundswell of feeling, ill feeling against what people see as, the domination of some of our partners on our affairs, while development is not going on. We should remember that Chad is very much at the very bottom of the United Nations Human Development Index, despite the fact that it is endowed with uranium. Almost 7% of global uranium is from the country. It has oil, it has tin, it has gold, but you just look at the situation that Niger is not coming out of this cycle of poverty, and other. It should be a warning. And Niger was also one of the countries prone to unconstitutional changes of government. In fact, this was the first time we had a transfer of power from one democratically elected president to another in Niger since independence. And so all the signs were there that the democratization process was still very fragile, in the country. Okay, and then all these factors have come together, to cause what we are, seeing today. But that is no excuse, because military rule is not an alternative to democracy, and that is why we feel that we have to stop it. We have to stop the coup, and then we need to deal with also the root causes of what is happening. And I think that is what one of the panelists were talking about. Medium to long term, how do we build resilience in our member states to withstand some of these shocks, whether it is terrorism, whether it is the the serious competition. Africa again gradually being turned into an arena of proxy wars and others, the geostrategic interests, that do not benefit the continent and things like that. And at some point in time, we would have to confront all these situations instead of looking at democracy just as a cosmetic process, which is epitomized by periodic elections without any substance in between within the electoral cycle. So those are very critical issues that we have to talk to. They go beyond the immediate concerns in Chad. I think
Ambassador Musa, we understand you have another engagement. I'm not sure how much time you have left with us, but we like to pop one or two more questions so that we'll let you go. But if you will stay for the remainder of the conversation, that will be fine. But let's quickly maximize the remainder of the time. Happily, you address the issue of the early warning system in West Africa, and you also cited the example of Senegal. Fair enough, but I hope ECOWAS is also keeping track of the ordeal, almost persistent ordeal, of the opposition leader, Sonko, in Senegal. He was arrested, held for a long period of time, released, again rearrested, and you find all kinds of charges are being preferred against him. So I hope you are keeping track of that. That's on the side. But tell us something. What is your reading of it? Because I find it curious. Earlier, you were gravitating towards the realm of the so-called resource cost thesis. That is to say, resource-endowed countries often post some of the worst indices, and the forces that play around this, in Niger being, of course, one of such examples. But when we look at the Sahelian region in West Africa in particular, there is a claim that jihadists are on the rise in terms of their campaigns. what do we know, or what should we watch out for in terms of the goals of the jihadists? Is their role to have an Afghanistan in different parts of West Africa? They are also in Mozambique, I understand. That's after the many decades of mayhem of MNR. So what is the goal of the jihadists? And as you rightly observed, if it is the function of the military to ensure the territorial integrity of a state, which the Nigerian military would appear to have failed to undertake, and now they are using that as an alibi to overthrow the attempt to overthrow the constitutional authority. What do we know about the goal of the jihadists, and where are they coming from?
No, thank you. Thank you very, very, very much. And, first we have to look at the spark, what actually led to the current state of jihadism in West Africa. And then you go back to 2011 in Libya, the overthrow of Gaddafi. And today we have all the belt over the Sahel and West Africa. We've got hotspots, whether it is in Sudan, whether it is in Libya and others. And Europe has actually built a cordon sanitaire around it. So all these nefarious forces, the only way they can go is toward the Sahel. That is number one. Number two, the jihadists have an ideology, whether it is Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State franchise. In fact, they are two sides of the same coin, of the Wahhabism, who is more radical, who is following Islam the correct way, and others. And the intra-jihadist fight today is actually for the unification of the whole, jihadist movement, which began actually with Al-Qaeda, and then, diverge into Islamic State, where we have, franchises all over, like Islamic State, West Africa Province, you have Ansaru, you have Boko Haram, you have Jenim, and then, others. Their goal is global dominance, the Islamization of the world, and they are systematically doing it. If you look at their ideology, they want to move from the Middle East all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. That is the original goal. And to achieve it, they have to make use of whatever resources are available where they operate, so that illegal mining, for example, in Burkina Faso, in Mali and others, and then taxation, illegal taxation, control of the ethnic dynamics, within the country, the intercommunal, they will use everything to make sure that they keep enriching themselves. But the goal, the ultimate goal, is not criminal. It's not criminal, like some have said. It is about the dominance of Islam throughout the world, which is a bit of an utopia, but they are clinging onto it, and that is the goal that they are, embarking, upon. And I just want to get you back to what led to colonialism. I think slave trade was actually started by these same jihadists in our continents, and then the Europeans keyed in, and then colonization followed. The slave trade expanded, colonization and other, and we are seeing a full cycle of that process, where the jihadists are descending on West Africa, and our European partners are also telling us we are coming to save you, and others. But if you look at the attitude towards Ukraine and the attitude towards the very serious terrorist attacks in West Africa, there is very little water, that set promises of helping West Africa whole. The reason why the G5 Sahel collapsed, that they just could not get any support from everywhere. And the relative success of MNJTF in the Lake Chad Basin, led by Nigeria, and militarily also by Chad, is because you had capable states like Nigeria, like Chad, that are able to put their money where their mouth is. G5 Sahel is just a group of countries that are at the same level of poverty, Nobody demonstrates leadership and things like that. And this is where ECOWAS comes in. Because in the last year or so, ECOWAS has taken very serious steps to activate the ECOWAS standby force, and particularly its kinetic version, to take the fight to the terrorists in the region. Because the way it is already spreading into Benin, into Togo, into Cote d'Ivoire, and the northern parts of Ghana today is flooded with refugees from the southern parts of Burkina Faso. This is an avalanche that is coming, and West Africa should not think that this is an issue for Mali, an issue for for Burkina Faso and other. It is an issue for the entire region. And the spirit that actually led Nigeria under the former leader Babangida, the Rawlings of Ghana, to intervene in Liberia, Sierra Leone, in order to stop the eastward flow of instability from the Mano River region. This is the spirit we have to recapture today. One of the most existential threats facing the region today is jihadism and terrorism. And if we do not defeat it, then we can say goodbye to development. We can say goodbye to regional economic integration. So this is what, I think in conclusion, I want to see that ideologically, controlling resources in Africa is just a means to a bigger goal by these jihadists. That is the political and the military control of the whole sub-Saharan Africa. And that has been in their doctrine for several decades now. So this is what I would want to say. So it is time we woke up in the region.
Indeed, Ambassador Abdel Fattah Musa, ECOWAS Commissioner, Political Affairs, Peace and Security, you've delved deep into the issues affecting Africa, and our guest in the studio here will be able to respond to some of these pertinent issues that you've raised. We thank you so much for coming on Good Morning Nigeria, and our condolence once again.
Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure. And thanks to the fellow panelists for a very useful contributions to this conversation. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you so much. We'll take a break now. When we return, our conversation will continue. Don't go away.
You are going through the brunt of the fuel subsidy. I know the pressure and the demand and lamentation, but you understand it much better. You are the one who understands the labor pain. That is only after that pain you see the smile of a child that you are relieved and forget the pain completely. And that's what we are going through economically. You are the one who can educate better the public to understand that we have to go through this. Cartel and thieves have been raping us and fleecing this country before now. You say enough is enough. We are taking our country back.
The counsel of our fathers.
My advice to these young people is please do not take us back to those harrowing days. You probably do not know what it is.
Nigerian youths, let's build our nation together.
Hey, welcome to the Star Times 35th anniversary celebration. To see Thank you to every StarTimes family for being an integral part of our journey. StarTimes has decided to give you a price slash on decoders. Yes, we are slashing the price of our antenna decoder from 8,900 naira to 7,500 naira and the dish decoder from 13,300 naira to 9,900 naira. But that's not all. Existing subscribers can recharge for 2 months on their current bouquet and get upgraded to the next higher bouquet. And if you recharge on the classic or super bouquet, you will receive a fantastic reward of extra 15 days of free viewing. You can enjoy our top local and international content. So, what are you waiting for? Quickly, visit any StarTimes outlet around you to recharge or buy your decoder between June 12th to August 31st to enjoy this fabulous offer. Wow! Yay! Let the celebration begin! StarTimes, entertain your family.
Nigeria means unity.
Nigeria means freedom to me.
Nigeria means greatness to me.
Nigeria is indivisible. There is nothing you can do. We all have to savage it together and learn to love each other. We are indivisible.
As a mother and a leader, I will always preach for peace and unity in this country, because that is the only thing that will give us progress. Though tribes and tongues may differ, in brotherhood we stand, and it is the woman that does that.
You're welcome back, and some breaking news reaching us in the studio says President Bola Tinubu will today, Monday, 31st July, make a broadcast to the nation at 7 o'clock in the evening, and television, radio stations and other electronic media outlets are enjoined to hook up to the network service of the NTA and the Radio Nigeria for the broadcast. That will be at 7 p.m. this evening on Monday. Let's bring you back, Ambassador Baraya. You know, we're discussing, you know, before your audio went off, we're asking you questions about the schools, and you were on Burkina Faso actually when Guinea-Bissau
Right.
there. So and of course, Ambassador Abdul Fattah Musa raised a lot of issues. So if you can continue from where you stopped and sort of address what he said also.
Thank you very much indeed for yet another opportunity for me to take up from where I stopped. I was saying that very powerful speech by President Bola Tinubu of Nigeria immediately after taking office as the chair of the Authority of Heads of State of Government of the ECOWAS. You know, as if he saw these new developments of coups, he made a lot of emphasis on zero tolerance about coup d'etats. And behold, this is what is happening now. But for whatever it's worth, I have a feeling, on the whole, in as much as the coups are taking place, let's also go deep and go in for some self-introspection. The coups cannot just take place. There are reasons. Of course, the reasons given by the junta in Niamey are wishy-washy as far as I'm concerned. There are no just you come and say you justify why you are coming. But left to me, the problem, the root causes of coup d'etats have to be also seriously addressed by our leaders. I'm taking it from what he said because he was making reference, for example, to Senegal. What are these root causes? Foremost, of course, there are problems of insecurity, corruption, tenure elongation, you know, rigging of elections, and most of these things. With due respect to the leadership generally in Africa, some of these problems are still living with us. Some of the leaders forget once they are on the seat, they think everything is over and only to themselves. This is not the situation. As we speak today, right now, only yesterday, outside our sub-region, in I think Central African Republic, there was a referendum by President Andorra, and it meant that this is after serving 10 good years. By next year, he will be 10 years. Their own arrangement is for 5 years.
And he wants to contest.
To change the constitution after yesterday's referendum, to change the constitution so that he can contest for another term of 7 years. And after that 7 years again, it will be free for all. He could no term limit. for the country. Look at that. You think people, for goodness sake, we want a better and a different Africa. And that was the message I was trying to emphasize that President Tinubu was sending from Guinea-Bissau. About his views generally, on especially in Niger Republic, there is this problem of, there were so many conspiracy theories about the background of the coup. But the fact of the matter is that we all know, until now, United States of America, France, have serious air bases in Niger Republic, and they were meant to monitor the activities of Al-Qaeda, of jihadists all over. And the extent to which they have succeeded in doing that, your guess is as good as mine.
Ambassador Baraya, thank you very much. I'm also delighted that you brought in the example of Central African Republic. Now, this is part of the mechanism many would argue that some African leaders use to fulfill all righteousness. You say, look, let's have a referendum. And if it is yes, or oui, as is said in French, then it means that the people have spoken. But civil society and others are kicking against that. 10-year allegation that would now make it 7 years in the first instance. No, term of president will now be 7 years, and then thereafter there will be no term limits. So he could probably be president for life. That was Central African Republic. That's where we had Emperor Jean Bede Bokassa. I'm sure those who are of maturity will remember Bede Bokassa. He styled himself as an emperor. So we are having a new one, probably in the making, who would say that it's an emperor. And Central African Republic has been on the boil absolutely. And I think that Nigeria should also be on the lookout, because we know that there are elements that stray from there to our northern part, particularly the northeastern part of
the country,
of our country. So that's a useful point to bear in mind. Let's bring in again Dr. Sonwo Olatunji David. We have a number of issues on the plate. One is that, yes, the nature of our democracy, as Dr. Ochigbo was saying, on the continent would appear in some cases not to be delivering on the democratic goods. And therefore, peace and security and hunger and disease would appear to still be, peace and security elusive, hunger and disease, are rife in different parts of the continent. But what is it that can be done in this case of Mali, which is still on, Burkina Faso, and more existential at the moment is Niger Republic? What is the messaging that goes there? Has Niger ever made progress under the military?
The truth of the matter is that no nation has made significant progress under the military. That's just the basic fact. Because military men are not trained to run government. It depends on which side of the divide you are in. If you want to look at it like a typical example is Nigeria, we could say we brought in war against indiscipline, and some people reminiscence over that. It depends on which side of the divide you were. Some people cried, and some families never recovered because of that. Either way you look at it, democracy still remains the best form of participatory government. And if you could look at why are we having bad governance, it's because our democracy is not yet tried and tested. And we need to be patient. Unfortunately, there are several external forces that is always instigating violence and crisis in the budding African nation. Most of the nations in Africa have their democracy less than 100 years. Nigeria is just not up to 70, so we are still budding. And the influence of the Arabs, the influence of the West, the influence of Russia, and several other developed nations trying to force a little child to behave in a way that is not its nature. It's there, that is the root cause, that's what is behind all these coups that we are talking about. Because when the civil society, for instance, we are working. I'm in touch with the Workshop in Niger and in Mali as well, and we are looking at what's the opposition on this. The position is still divided because, of course, there are several influences that comes to play. It's just like in Nigeria. I had this conversation with some of my colleagues before I came on stage, and I'm asking them, and so many of them still feel different ways because we are human beings and we are all subject to our various views. However, democracy thrives on the rule of law. Democracy thrives on abiding by the Constitution. Democracy thrives when you can approach the court and get good judgment. These are the things that, these are the elements that makes democracy to thrive. And these are the elements we must start to reinforce. We must try to develop a system that will make, a good example is the 2020 election in the US. Because they had a system, the wills and caprices of Donald Trump could not work because of the existence of a system. And so what we need to be talking about in Nigeria, in Africa now, is to build a system that has capacity to resist. And that is a common responsibility of every person, not only the political class, but even those of us that are in the civil society, even the media, the judiciary. But this does not include the military. So we shouldn't bring them into the space at all. In Africa, we must emphasize the fact that even when there are conflicts in the system, the military option is a no-no area. And that is what we stand by. That the military option should not even come onto the table. If there is a crisis between the family, the next thing is not to call police. They will say, let's settle it at home. Let's bring in the mechanism of the family. Every family has its own mechanism. So we should emphasize that and tell the military, your responsibility is to stay and defend the territorial integrity of the nation. When there is a problem in the polity, let's develop systems to solve that problem, to resolve it in any way. It could take, the West had its own share. There was Wild West. There were several crises in the United States. If you go through the history of their development, they did not bring in military. Because each time we bring in the military, it wipes out a complete, the total system and resets the system, brings us back to zero. And then we start building again. And when we get to a point about, like, look, a case in question is Nigeria. We are developing a democratic culture. We should be allowed to develop the culture, do experiments, fail in the experiment, but keep developing the culture until we get to a point where we'll be mature.
Dr. Sanu, thank you so much for that. Let's bring in Dr. Abel Ochibo. How can Africa forge ahead?
Thank you so much. I think building on what I had said earlier, and also on what a number of the speakers have talked about already, I want to address the issue of mismanagement, or if you like, the challenge of management of our democracy. And that's a very serious issue on the African space, dovetailing and cascading to all the constituent nations in Africa. But let me say a few things along this line as follows. I think I read a piece written by Bola Akintarinwa, and he was talking about a phrase that he addressed as the poor management of poverty. We've always talked about the poor management of resources. But there is a new, grammar in Africa coming up about the poor management of poverty. And I think that should concern all of us. Secondly, our president talked so much about the issue of democracy being difficult to manage. I think in his speech at the 63rd ordinary session, where he took over as chairman of ECOWAS, he alluded to the fact that democracy is difficult to manage. But again, he stressed that it still remains the best form of governance. Now, let's see it this way. There's something I call the gun fund conundrum. And that is what many of the military juntas in Africa have been poking at us. Why do people run away immediately you see a military? Maybe the gun. And that puts fear into everybody. We are dealing with the issue of Nigeria now. They are dispersing crowd. You can't come near the presidential palace because they'll poke the gun at you. So their reasoning is that if you get there to govern, if you give us fund, then we'll put you out and give you the gun. And so it's like an option. And now we have to actually, in trying to manage our democracy, be able to come to terms with this issue of gun fund conundrum that I've talked about. And that's what many of our speakers have been talking about, that the military has to be sidelined permanently to the barracks. But there's a way to doing that because it's not just going to happen overnight. Now, the other point is that, you know, a speaker earlier mentioned the fact that coups are extremely contagious. And I think that is something of note. But again, let me come down to what the president of the ECOWAS Commission, Traoré, said very recently. I think he painted some statistics, and these are very grim figures. I remember him saying that between January and June, he talked about the number of terrorist attacks we have had in the sub-region, close to 2,000. He talked about close to 5,000 fatalities. He talked about, by the end of April, about 500,000 refugees. And then he talked about between 30 to 42 million that are going to be in need of food and other needs, you know. And he said 42 million if that is by the end of August, if nothing is done. Now, these are very, very grim figures, and which should concern all of us. So when we are talking of management of our democracy, now, I will say it in 4 areas. Number one,
we are pressed for time now, so we are unlikely, therefore, to have the time to accommodate the 4 issues you needed to further elaborate on. I would like to thank you for the perspective that you have raised. That's to say, dealing with some of the root causes of the contagion that we are seeing in West Africa. Gentlemen, you've contributed significantly and provided perspectives on this conversation, but I'm sure we all recognize one fact, that the measures that the authority of ECOWAS heads of state and government have outlined is one matter that remains outstanding for us to deal with. But while we keep that in abeyance, I'd just like to ask this question so that I get your comments very briefly from it. Nigeria and Niger are neighbors. Nigeria supplies Niger electricity. Nigeria provides transport routes to Niger. Nigeria's former president, Muhammadu Buhari, of course, has very good rapport with persons in Niger, and I imagine the elite class in Niger. We are also building a rail line from Kano to Maradi, and so on and so forth. Many, again, analysts would say, wow, this pointers to the kind of leverage that Nigeria could have over Niger Republic. We have our responsibility as a littoral state because Niger is landlocked and there's a limit to which you can squeeze them in terms of their imports and otherwise. But Ambassador, I'd like to get your views on this very briefly. Should Niger, those who are keeping the president in captivity at the moment, think about all of this and see what the cost might be to them, because Nigeria is a big state, let's be realistic.
Nigeria indeed is a big brother, and what you have said is quite correct. The fact of the matter is this, you know, both countries, actually look at them both ways. I monitored the BBC Hausa service, for example, this morning. A very strong opposition leader who contested alongside with President Bazoum in 2020, you know, came up to say, no, the Republic of Niger cannot withstand sanctions, in particular from Nigeria, for even 1 week. For even 1 week, and that's very correct. Consider, we have a land border that is very long, about 1,500 kilometers. and all our country, and our borders are for us. Electricity in particular, you made mention of. My own part of Kebbi State is just 10 minutes away from the Republic of Niger. And as a matter of priority, so many of us, the elites from that part, would want to be on the grid that's going through Niger, but because it is almost always constant as against that which, so they are given too much priority. They are given too much priority, so their own is working very well. Just for you to look at it. So there are many things like that that we cannot, but just as a way forward, left to me, we can all go back to the agenda set for Africa. Agenda 2063, about the Africa we want. A Renaissance Africa. Africa that is a darling today of so many big powers. We are going into many partnerships, and these partnerships with so many countries, Russia, Turkey, India, EU, South America, this all paying beautiful dividends. And so I think that's the way forward.
Okay, thank you so much. In 30 seconds. 30 seconds.
Nigeria's leverage. Nigeria is the big brother. And with Bola Tinubu, the president of Nigeria, I'm sure they will resolve it in a bit.
Okay, Dr. Abel Ochu.
But the big brother shouldn't also tolerate nonsense.
That's what I'm saying. He will do it. They will resolve it in a bit.
The strong language coming from ECOWAS, is enough to send chills down their spine. Yes.
We will resolve it in a bit. I'm sure they will resolve it in a bit.
Okay, thank you so much, Ambassador Osman Baraya, former Nigerian ambassador to Ethiopia, African Union. Thank you so much for coming on Good Morning Nigeria. We appreciate your input. Dr. Sanwo Olatunji David, National Coordinator, West African Civil Society Forum. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
With pleasure, we appreciate you. Dr. Abel Ochubo, Public Affairs Analyst and Commentator. Thank you so much for your input on this conversation. And Ambassador Abdul Fattah Musa left us earlier. He's the ECOWAS Commissioner, Political Affairs, Peace and Security. We'll now take sports.
All right, Jumai, I understand that
we've run out of time,
we're out of time. Of course, the Super Falcons are playing later this morning.
Yes.
They'll be taking on the Republic of Ireland in the last round-robin game at the ongoing Women's World Cup.
5020 or what? What's your...
No, I don't get into that gambling game. So that's it for us on Good Morning Nigeria today. Thank you for being with us. Tomorrow is another day, same time, 7 o'clock in the morning. Until then, look after yourselves. I'm Kingsley Osandalo.
And I am Jumai Yusuf. Do have a great week ahead.